The alarm hit before I even finished checking the corridor. Red light, sharp and sudden. Princess Vaith Salinar froze beside me, her 4 fingers gripping the strap of her formal robe so hard the fabric creased white. I did not freeze. I grabbed her arm and pulled her behind the nearest support column, just as the first plasma bolt cracked through the space where her head had been a second earlier. "Move," I said, "now." She did not move. She stared at me instead, eyes wide, breathing fast, like I was the danger, instead of the 3 armed figures sprinting toward us from the far end of the transit station. I had been her escort for 6 days. 6 days of her flinching, every time I stepped too close. 6 days of her guards whispering about the human they had been forced to accept onto the detail. Her father, the Dominion speaker, had insisted. Human escorts had a reputation. Not a kind one. Not exactly a bad one either. Just a reputation for finishing the job, no matter what it cost. She had heard the stories. Everyone in the Kesh Dominion had heard the stories about humans. We did not stop. We did not calculate risk the way other species did. We threw ourselves into danger like it owed us nothing, and we owed it everything. I never confirmed or denied any of it. I just did my job. "Vaithith," I said, using her name instead of her title, because titles waste time in a fight. "Stay behind the column, and do not move until I tell you." Her personal guards, 2 tall Kesh soldiers in ceremonial armor that looked impressive and did almost nothing against real weapons, were pinned down 20 feet away, trading fire with the attackers and losing ground fast. This was not a robbery. This was an assassination attempt, clean and coordinated, timed for the exact minute the station's security rotation changed shifts. I leaned out, fired twice, dropped 1 attacker before he reached the walkway. The other 2 split apart, 1 flanking left, 1 pushing straight down the center toward us. "They know exactly where she is," I said mostly to myself. This was planned. "Ronan," Vaith said, and I noticed it was the first time she had used my actual name instead of just calling me the human. "What do? We get you to the transport bay. 200 meters. I need you to run when I say run." She nodded, but her hands were shaking. I fired again, covering the retreat of her guards as they scrambled to reposition. One of them, a young soldier named Talus, took a graze across his shoulder and cried out. I pulled him behind the column too, pressed my hand hard against the wound to slow the bleeding, and shoved his own hand into place to keep the pressure going. "Hold this. Don't let go." "Why are you helping me?" Talus said through clenched teeth. "You do not even like us." "I never said that," I answered, already turning back toward the fight. "Now stay down." The truth was more complicated than liking or disliking anyone. I had taken this job because it paid well, and because the Dominion needed someone who would not hesitate, when hesitation meant a dead princess, and a war nobody wanted. I did not need to like the people I protected. I just needed to keep them breathing. The attacker on the left flank came around the corner faster than expected. I caught the motion at the edge of my vision, and turned, firing on instinct, catching him in the chest before he could aim. He dropped. 1 left. "Vaith, when I say run, you run straight down that corridor and do not look back at me. Understand?" "I understand," she said, though her voice cracked on the second word. I scanned the open floor between the column and the transport bay doors. No cover, 200 meters of exposed walkway, and somewhere in the shadows above the mezzanine, the last attacker was repositioning for a clean shot. I could feel it more than see it, the particular stillness that comes right before someone lines up a kill. "Run," I said. She ran. I ran beside her, angling my body slightly ahead and to her left, watching the mezzanine, watching the shadows, watching everything at once the way you learn to, when your life depends on noticing the one detail that does not belong. There. A glint of metal on the upper platform, barely visible, aimed down at an angle that would catch her square in the back the moment she crossed the open gap between 2 support pillars. I did the math without thinking about it, because there was no time to think, only to act. If I called out a warning, she would turn to look, and turning would put her directly in the shot's path instead of clipping the edge of it. If I tried to push her aside, the angle was wrong. I would not reach her in time. There was only one thing I could do that would work. I moved into the gap first, half a step ahead of her, putting my body between the mezzanine and her back. The plasma bolt hit me in the shoulder and chest, a burning, blinding impact that knocked the air out of my lungs and dropped me hard onto the metal floor. My armor absorbed most of it, kept the shot from going straight through, but the heat and force still felt like being struck by a closing door made of fire. I heard Vaith scream my name, heard my own ragged breathing, heard the distant crack of return fire, as Talus and the other guard finally found their angle and took down the last attacker from the mezzanine. Then it was quiet, except for footsteps running toward me instead of away. Ronan. Vaith dropped to her knees beside me, her hands hovering over the scorched armor plating, like she was afraid to touch it and afraid not to. Ronan, say something. Told you to keep running, I managed, my voice rough. Not stop. You stepped in front of it, she said, and her voice had changed completely. No fear left in it now, just something raw and stunned. You saw it coming, and you stepped in front of it on purpose. That's the job. That is not a job. That is... She stopped, pressing her palm flat against my chest where the armor had cracked, applying pressure the way I had shown Talus only minutes earlier. You could have died. Could have, I agreed. Didn't. Security teams flooded the station a moment later, medics close behind them. Vaith did not move away to let them work. She stayed kneeling beside me, one hand still pressed to my shoulder, guiding the medic's attention to exactly where the burn was worst, speaking in quick, sharp sentences that left no room for anyone to slow down. I watched her face while the medic worked. 6 days of flinching, of stepping back whenever I moved too fast, of watching me like I was a blade that might turn on her without warning. All of it was gone now, replaced by something steadier. They told me humans do not think before they act, she said quietly, while the medic sealed the wound with a cooling patch. That you throw yourselves at danger without weighing the cost. Sometimes that's true. No, she said, shaking her head slowly. You weighed it. I watched you weigh it. You looked at the shot, you looked at me, and you chose in less than a second what most of my own royal guard could not choose in an hour of deliberation. I tried to sit up, and immediately regretted it. She put a firm hand on my good shoulder and pushed me back down without hesitation, the same steady confidence she had lacked entirely 6 days earlier. Stay still, she said. That is an order, not a request. I almost laughed, though it hurt to do it. Yes, princess. Vaith, she corrected. You used my name when it mattered. I would like you to keep using it. The medics finished stabilizing me and prepared to move me to the station's care ward. Before they lifted the stretcher, Vaith leaned down, close enough that only I could hear her. I feared you, she admitted. Since the day you arrived, I feared what you were capable of, because everyone told me humans are dangerous in ways no one can predict. And now? Now I understand, she said. You are dangerous, but never to me. You were always dangerous for me. She stayed at my side through the transfer, through the ride to the care ward, through the long hour afterward, when the medics finally let visitors back into the recovery room. Talus came by too, his own shoulder wrapped and healing, and for the first time since the assignment began, nobody in the room treated me like an outsider wearing the wrong uniform. 3 weeks later, healed enough to walk without the support brace, I received new travel orders. A diplomatic journey to the outer settlements. High risk. Months of exposure to hostile territory. The kind of assignment that got escorts replaced, not requested. Vaith had requested me by name. When I reported to the transport bay, she was already waiting, dressed for travel instead of ceremony, no guards flanking her the way protocol usually demanded. You did not have to ask for me specifically, I said. There are escorts with cleaner records. I did not want a clean record, she said. I wanted someone who steps in front of the shot, instead of calculating whether I am worth the risk. That's not a small thing to ask of someone. No, she agreed, meeting my eyes without a trace of the fear that used to live there. It is not. That is exactly why I asked you. I picked up my gear and fell into step beside her as we boarded the transport, and for the first time in 6 days of guarded distance and 3 weeks of careful recovery, neither of us needed to say anything else. She walked beside me instead of behind me, and I understood that some kinds of trust cannot be explained. They can only be earned. one plasma bolt at a time,